Inselmilkom u nilqakom għal edizzjoni oħra tal-programm Indepth. Fil-programm tal-lum se nitkellmu dwar is-suġġett tal-immigrazzjoni, il-hate speech, il-protesti riċenti li rajna dan l-aħħar fiċ-ċentri ta' detenzjoni. Biex nitkellmu dwar dan is-suġġett għandi mistieden illum lil Dr. Ahmed Bugre li huwa id-direttur tal-Foundation for Shelter and Support to Migrants. Dr. Bugre, thank you for joining me. I'd like to start off by discussing a bit the situation when it comes to hate speech in Malta. Now, hate speech is a crime. It has recently been made a crime, but it seems that it's on the rise. Do you agree that it's increasing?
First of all, thank you so much for inviting me to this program. And your subject of hate speech is not something that is very new. It's something that has always existed, many times suppressed, but it looks as if nowadays people have been emboldened, a majority of people have been emboldened to come out and to express their feeling even openly on social media. It is not because it never existed. It has always been there and people have felt the impact of hate speech, but no one has taken it very seriously. And I believe that there was this encouragement, or there seems to be this tacit acceptance that hate speech against other people, especially people of color or black people from Africa, is acceptable. And I think that it is hidden behind the subject of today, immigration, migration. So people feel that they are being that they are defending their national interests. People feel that, okay, we are Maltese or whoever it is, so we can speak against other people. But I would also add that hate speech is not only limited to Malta. We have seen hate speech rise up in other EU countries, and even recently in Africa itself, in South Africa, where there was actually a xenophobic attacks of black people against black people. So hate speech and populism are the two new trends that we see in the whole of Europe.
I agree that we're sort of following the trend of other countries, but obviously we're speaking about the local context, and it seems that hate speech is seen more often whenever either there are new migrant arrivals or whenever there is some protest at the detention centers. We've seen a number of those very recently. Do you think that people are maybe justified in showing concern whenever there's a protest, maybe the one like in Halfar, where it turned a bit violent, where we saw cars being burnt and employees said they were being threatened? Do you think the migrants staying or being held rather at the Halfar center could have actually made things worse?
There are always a discussion when it comes to migration. First of all, I would want to say that when you talk about migration, you are talking about human beings. And when you talk about human beings, you have to look at context. Of course, any form of violence, any form of intimidation against people is not acceptable. Yeah? So there is no one who is condoning with the destruction of property or the unrest of people. But however, we have to look at the conditions on which people are also kept. It is illegal to detain someone who is seeking asylum. That is not only law, it is also a judgment by the European Court of Human Rights and confirmed by our courts. And therefore, when people are locked up because they are on a soil or in any country because they want to seek asylum, it is wrong. Secondly, most of the people who have been rescued at sea and brought into Malta are people who have gone through traumatic experiences of war, both in their countries, both in Libya, but even during the rescue processes. And therefore, when a person has been brought on shore and not given that treatment and not given that attention, at some point, it's going to escalate. Detention centers are not places where you keep people for a long time, where you have untrained persons who are handling these people. So at some point, this is going to escalate. Of course, not excusing it, but let's look at the cause. We always have to talk about the symptoms. What we saw happen is not something that we, those who are working in the migration sector, did not expect to happen. It has always happened. In fact, when I used to run the Malta Open Center, there were many times that there were massive demonstrations with even bigger people. But at that time, what we did was to intervene, to dialogue, to discuss. if you are facing someone who is expressing a grievance of their own conditions with police force, then it's going to escalate into violence. And I think that this is where the gaps that we have to look at and prevent it from happening, than people using the expression of people's pain into hate speech.
Now, many Maltese would say that the migrants being held at these detention centres are ungrateful, and they're not grateful for the hospitality that they're being shown and for being given shelter and food. But what is the situation really like inside these centres?
Let me put this into context. I have the recent figures published by UNHCR on their website of the number of people who are living in conditions in open centres and detention centres. So we have in Safi Detention Centre, as at August 2019, which means not September and October, there were 1,026 people living in Safi Detention Centre. Now, Safi was not made even for 400 people. Okay, so 1,026 people living in Safi under cramped conditions, under prison-like conditions. Second, Halfa Tent Village, 1,013 people in containers. Halfa Tent Village was built for what? A maximum of 600, 700, 800 people. It's holding over 1,000 people. Then you have got Masa Initial Reception Center, where I used to work. It has 397 people. So the conditions, the overcrowding of people, the conditions, the prolongations of the decision-making processes in which people's statuses are determined is a triggering factor. Yeah? So when human beings, those who have arrived here and rescued at sea, have completely applied for asylum. But our system cannot handle those numbers which are coming. The question I want to ask is, the numbers that have arrived this year is not different from the numbers which are always arriving since 2002. So we don't have a crisis of number, we have a crisis of management, of long-term management, mitigation of risk, and foreseeing these things. So those of us who are working in this sector foresaw that at some point our system is going to crack, it's going to fail, and there might be something like this which will happen unless there is a long-term planning for this happening.
Now, some people would argue that the whole country is overcrowded and that Malta has been doing more than its fair share when it comes to migration. It has been bearing the brunt of migration along with Italy. And obviously, when it comes to the European Union, there's not much solidarity when it comes to receiving and caring for migrants. Do you agree that Malta is doing more than it can, or are we lacking? Should we do even more?
I think that is a fair criticism of not only Malta, but also the southern countries. This is not only happening in Malta, but it's happening also in Greece. It's also happening in Spain. When it comes to Malta, we are arguing on the one hand that when it comes to asylum seekers, there seems to be the argument that we are full. When it comes to attracting foreign workers, it seems to be that we have the space for thousands of people more. So there is dichotomy in our discussion. Is the problem that Malta is full, or is the discussion that we cannot handle the burden of having to deal with people who are seeking asylum in this country? Yeah, this is the discussion which is not being happening, because Malta is still open to receive thousands of people in employment. The Maltese economy needs people to work, and we are doing all we can to attract foreign workers in Malta. So the argument of Malta being full is fallacious on the one hand. However, again, the problem is not a problem of the number of people who are arriving, because the number of people who are arriving since 2001 is very consistent. It's always consistent that it is in the mid-1000s or just under 2000. However, in Malta, we have held containers since 2006. Have we built structures? Have we foreseen the arrival of people? Malta is caught up, unfortunately, on the pathway of people seeking safety in Europe. Malta cannot move its position. Therefore, what we have to do is to plan. Malta can never withdraw from its position as a country that receives migrants who would come here and seek asylum, because Malta is both a signatory to the 1951 Convention, but also part of the EU. So for me, it is planning, and it's not a question of lack of resources. Where I will criticize the EU is that the EU will make promises of taking people and not take them. In fact, out of these 2,090 people who, actually this year, 2,804 people arrived here by sea, have been rescued. Now, this year, there were 2,246 applications processed. There were 588 people who were pledged to be sent to other countries, which is only 16% of those who arrived here. And actually, those who were transferred to other countries were 294, 29%. So much has to be done. But I believe that the system cannot be made that other countries will come and take all the people who are coming to Malta. I mean, how long will someone wait for their fate to be decided that they are in limbo?
How long does the asylum process usually take? Or how long is it taking now?
Again, progress has been made that within the next, in fact, this year, 71% of those who laid their claims were processed, which means that it took fairly a quick time. Yeah? The problem is not processing. The problem is, where do you move the person to? When a person has been given protection, you either give the person integration to remain in Malta, or the person is prepared to go to another country. If other countries do not take these people, then these people are remaining in a legal limbo. They don't know their future. And that is what causes the frustration, that people are living in Malta. They don't know their future. They wake up and they have nothing to hope for. And when you have a young person who is full of energy, this year, a majority of those who arrived in Malta are young people. They have their future ahead of them. If you put them in a center and you feed them 3 times a day, what these people need is not food. They need a future. They need to know, I am going to have a future. So that is what causes the frustration. That is what causes the mental health aggravation. On top of that, these people have gone through traumatic experiences. So people can blame the migrant. But I believe that if you and I were in the same position, we will act in a very similar way. Because can you imagine that you have dreamt of reaching safety? You've risked your life. You've lived under war. You have lived on the sea in a boat, paid traffickers to traffic you, all for safety. You arrive on safety, you are taken to a detention center, you are put in a detention center, you have been given a status and said, yes, you deserve protection, but we can't decide your future. Let's wait for another country to come and decide your future. But these people are here. Therefore, our integration program must start from the very first day of people's arrival. Of course, Malta has limitations in terms of accommodation. Now is very expensive. So people are forced to live in the open centers. If you release people to go outside, they cannot just go into the job market the next day. Yeah? There are Maltese who are facing accommodation problems. Except where you have got refugees who are facing problems. So these are limitations of resources that Malta has. But we can do better. We can manage better. And we have seen it happen. I mean, I have worked in this sector since the beginning. Yeah? So is there long-term planning? No. We are thinking that this problem is here today. This problem is here and is going to vanish. And finally, it's a very difficult problem for politicians to discuss, because politicians know that their constituencies do not want to discuss about migration. So it's being given a lip service, it's being given platitudes, but there is no active, concrete plans about the future of these young people. And that is stressful.
So basically what you're saying, if I'm understanding correctly, is that even in view of our economy's need for thousands of new workers every year, and in view of the situation of these migrants who have literally nothing to do sitting around in these detention centers or open centers, they can be trained, given the necessary skills, become part of the workforce, and that will help them integrate into the Maltese society. Is that right?
Yeah, Bill, huh? It is in our interest to do it. But why are we not doing it? The question is, when you have a workforce that you don't deal with and you want to get other people to come in, why? And that's where the hate speech again comes. Is it because they're African? Because the African persons are not the only immigrants in Malta. I mean, we don't see a demonstration against Eastern Europeans. We don't see a demonstration against Chinese or Filipinos or whoever. Why has it always been a target of the African person? And this is where racism and xenophobia comes into and plays in the hate speech. Did the hate speech start because people were expressing their concerns and they had the right to kind of become vocal about the conditions of their stay in detention centers and open centers? Is it what caused hate speech? No. It is because people feel that these people do not even have a right to be here. Yeah? Those who have been living in Malta and given protection, what has been their future? What program has been there to integrate them? So if we are able to look at these people as an asset and to put up programs, it will be a win-win situation for all of us.
Do you think that politicians, or certain politicians rather, make the situation even worse by some of the things they say? I mean, earlier this week we saw a leading PN politician, for example, expressing his support again for Matteo Salvini, who we know what his views on migration are. Or we're hearing all this talk about, not specifically about African migrants, but against foreign workers. And I think it's getting people a bit mixed up between actual workers, people who come here legally, and the migrants who come by boat or whatever and are staying at the detention centers. Do you think there's this mix-up and it's actually making the situation even worse? It's playing on people's fears or people's concerns about migration?
Again, we come back to, I want to win votes, then I want to see the real situation and deal with it. Yeah? I mean, the Nationalist Party has been one of the parties that has been on the forefront of the migration reform. I was privileged to have worked with a number of ministers, including Gonzi himself, in coming up with the integration program. The politics apart, Malta needs workers in the future. If there were not Filipinos, our care sector will collapse. If there were not African workers, our construction work will go down. So we do need these people. So instead of fighting against them, as you said, let us think. And this has contributed to the living of people in a legal limbo. People are living here, they are being used as cheap labor, they don't have rights, and one day these people are going to say, why am I paying taxes for? What is my future in this country where I am being used for my labor and not given my rights as a worker? So this feeds not into integration. But again, let's come up with a progressive integration policy, an effective integration that we can look at how can we bring a win-win situation to us, because Malta needs these people. And if the people do not go to other countries, then we can set them up on an integration path. Look, in about 6 years' time, you are able to become a long-term resident. In about 10 years' time, you are able to apply for citizenship. You can bring your family. At the moment, people who have been given protection, subsidiary protection and living in Malta, have no right to family reunification. So they've been living here for over 10 years and they haven't seen their wives and kids. I mean, so that is not something that is healthy for us. Yeah? So whichever politician says whatever they want to say, the reality of the situation is that we need to benefit from migration rather than see it as a liability.
Let's talk for a minute about another scenario that we have seen happen over recent months, the eviction of hundreds of migrants who were living in certain places, often illegally or abusively. And the authorities went in and tackled the problem, but in the process evicted these migrants. And some NGOs said that it might actually be making the situation worse because these migrants now ended up homeless. What do you think is the solution to such a scenario?
It always looks as if the powerless and the victims are victimized. It takes the persons who rent garages, who rent substandard buildings to migrants, because the migrants are desperate. Yeah? Most migrants work for less than a minimum wage or a minimum wage. They have no guarantees in their work. So the only way that they can afford any decent accommodation is to rent these substandard places. Who is the criminal here? Who is the one who did wrong here? The one who is abusing of the migrants' vulnerability, or the migrants themselves? But you end up seeing that the migrants are being raided. They are being paraded as being the ones who are causing the problem, and the ones who own the properties. You never hear them being discussed. This is, again, the unfairness of the whole situation. You are victimizing the vulnerable. Those people cannot rent a house for 700 euros, so they have to rent a place. I know garages that are being rented for 700 euros that nobody can sleep in it. So 6, 7 people have to share the cost. But who's making the money? The migrant is going to an employment site where he has no rights, he has no safety, he gets injured and no one cares about him. He is being exploited in terms of his accommodation, and the person is giving him a substandard accommodation. And yet he's the one who is being raided. I think that the house owner should be the ones who should be raided and arraigned in court. Again, it happened again in the Halfa case. Who were the ones who were arrested and paraded with handcuffs on the streets? The migrants. Yeah? So publicly, we are always blaming the migrants for something that other people have done. And that is wrong.
I'd like to close off on the issue of integration. Integration is a word we often hear about, but it seems that in practice it's not really working. And some people might argue that one of the reasons why integration isn't working is because of the huge differences in cultures when it comes to at least people coming from certain countries. And I think we have to acknowledge that it is a bit of a reality. The Maltese, especially those living in areas close to these reception centers, maybe like Marsa, like Bugre, they might feel it even more than certain people living in other areas where the problem is sort of out of sight, out of mind. Do you think that it is actually a problem, this difference in cultures, and besides training these asylum seekers to become part of the workforce, which would undoubtedly help them become part of society, do you think that there should also be some kind of programs to help them integrate more and accept more the Maltese way of doing things, so to speak?
Let's go to the beginning. Do Maltese want African migrants to integrate or to be included? Look at our national system. How many migrants, how many African people are involved in it? They're excluded. Our national culture program doesn't include migrants. The only thing that we include them in is work, because we need their labor. I do not believe that migrants cannot integrate in Malta. I have integrated in Malta. Of course, you can never fully become a Maltese person in terms of how you integrate. But what is integration? Integration is building friendships. Integration is embedding yourself in your community, being productive. And that comes by learning how people live. But it's not only the migrants who have to do that. Also, the Maltese have to reach out and understand where the other people are coming from. Many of the African migrants who have come here are Muslim. But there is a mosque here. I mean, not only Africans are Muslims. So integration is a two-way thing. I cannot integrate if you don't want me. And our system is built to make people move on. If you stay here, we can use your labor, we can pay you, but you have no future here, and people feel it. So when I feel rejected, and I arrive first, and you detain me, and you lock me up, and you maltreat me, or I feel maltreated, I do not want to stay here and make it my home, because from the beginning you have rejected me from the very first start. So the question is the onus on the migrant to integrate, or is the onus on the Maltese society itself to reach out? I mean, we have had many programs of integration, language, cultural practices, but if you don't have the funding, if you don't have the will to do it, recently we were thinking of an idea, at least of the African community, to start an African center. This African center will become a point of reference for African people, for art, for music, for dialogue, for debates. No one supported it. Yeah? Because it is not seen as very, very important. When Maltese went to other countries like Australia, Canada and things, they supported them to start Maltese gazines. That is where culture is being preserved. That is where children go as a point of reference. These things are not being accepted here in Malta. So people feel, I am here to work, I make the money, and one day I'll go somewhere else. But as long as people are staying here, where do they go? So you have a dichotomy of a society. I believe that integration works from the communities. In Marsa, integration works. Who are the ones who own the shops with Africans in Marsa? Marsa people. Yeah? I don't agree with ghettoization of people. I don't agree with segregation of people in particular areas. I believe that integration is supporting people to integrate in communities, because that is where people learn to know that I am not only a migrant, but my name is Ahmed. This is my interest. This is where I come from. It is when this interaction happens at that community local level that inclusion in society will happen. Finally, elections. All the migrants who have arrived here, or migrants, asylum seekers and refugees who have been given protection in this country, cannot vote even at the local level. They are living in communities, they are working, they are paying taxes, contributing, and yet they cannot even choose their local councillor. You are excluding them. If there is no civic participation of a person in the interest of what they do in the country, they will never. How many African people have you seen stand for elections?
None.
Because they feel if I go, they laugh at me. If I cannot even participate in the local level, in choosing a local councillor, how can I even participate in the national level as to who is my politician? And that is what politicians know. All the Africans, refugees and whoever who are here, at the end of the day, they can protest, but they can never vote. And that's why people are emboldened to go on the social media and hate speech and spew hate, and nobody will prosecute them because they have a vote. Give the refugees a vote, and integration will change because it will empower them to be included in the society. So I don't agree with the notion that refugees and migrants don't want to integrate because of culture. It is an excuse. If you want me to integrate in your country, then accept me for who I am. Include me in the civic participation, not just use me as a worker and pay me less wages and not give me rights. And people feel that. So that is the sense of rejection that other people are feeling. Of course, I'm not saying that this is across the board. But in the majority of cases, this country does not build structures to include people, but it builds structures to use people. So the economic argument, oh, they are beneficial to us because we need them. What if they were not, if they didn't have the economic benefit? Are they still capable of integration in Malta? And the question is, yes.
Dr. Ahmed Bugre, thank you very much for joining us. Unfortunately, time is up for today. Minna ħatana ma jifdal xejn ħlif illi nirringrazzjakom tal-li kontu magħna u nsellmilkom.
Thank you.